Alrighty, good morning, everybody. I think we'll go ahead and get this kicked off today. So appreciate everybody coming up for the webinar. I'm Tyler Herman. I'm with Louisiana Clean Fuels, and we have, I think, a great panel today to talk about workplace charging in our Empower program and how that might be useful for you and your businesses, and how this can be a benefit to your employees. So we'll get this kicked off. We'll hear from myself with Louisiana Clean Fuels, and then Michelle and David in Oklahoma with their Clean Cities coalitions. And then we'll hear from some businesses who are actually doing workplace charging and have that as a benefit for their employees, and then a utility and installer to talk about some of the technical and kind of logistics aspects of getting this work done. So without further ado, we'll kick it off. And I do want to say that this is going to be recorded. So this will be available on our YouTube after the webinar. And then the slides will be available for everybody as well. So if you miss something, that will be there for you. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A today. So hopefully y'all came prepared with some questions. So just to kick straight into it, we have our agenda here. We have some workplace charging basics that we want to talk about. Some of the benefits of workplace charging, a little bit of introduction to the idea of having these workplace charging coaches, which will be our Clean Cities folks on the line today. Some real world projects. We'll have time for a Q&A with Austin, who is going to be talking about some of his installations. Then we'll move over to the technical and funding considerations with the utility and installer, and then more time for Q&A and wrap up at the end. So I think this is kind of good visual just to show where people need charging. Most people do charge their electric vehicles at home, but a pretty significant portion of it, 15%, is done in the workplace. And that is even more true for people who live in multi-unit dwellings like apartment complexes, student housing, or low-income families who may not have access to home charging. So it becomes even more important for those individuals. And then there's the public charging, and that's kind of the smallest slice of the pie when it comes to charging electric vehicles. And so why offer workplace charging, right? It provides value to employees. It demonstrates climate leadership, attracts and retains talent, improves employee satisfaction, you can get certification points. It's good PR, frankly. And then it is a quantifiable metric when it comes to environment, the ESG goals, environment, social and governance goals, and sustainability reports. So it's kind of a win across the board. And then again, this is kind of going back to that chart, right? This enables greater EV adoption and makes it more available for people who may not have home charging. It supports use of these vehicles, both plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles. And it provides that midday charging time, right? Most charging happens overnight or right when people get home. And that can be a little bit more of a strain on the grid if you imagine very large numbers of vehicles charging, or if we're trying to use those renewables that are more active during the day, such as solar power. This midday stuff is much better for reducing that curtailment on the renewable side of the grid, which is a great benefit. So it's good for grid stability and keeping those costs low if we have time of use charges through your utility. And so we're not going to go through all this in extreme detail, but I did want to have these slides, a lot of these bullets for you to read. But what's the holdup, right? Like there are lots of questions that you need to answer as a workplace about workplace charging to make sure that this is going to work for you. The time of day and day of the week that employees are going to want access to charging, going to needing to understand the actual demand, how many charging stations you need. We'll learn more about that from the people on the call today. Should employees pay a fee for this, or should this be a straight benefit? What is it going to cost as an actual employer? And all these sorts of questions, costs and logistics, are really important considerations, and that's things that we can help with, and things that the folks on the call today are going to be good at kind of providing some insight towards. And then just a quick high-level thing, Empower is a program led by Clean Cities coalitions across the country, and it is one of 3 national workplace charging projects funded by the Department of Energy. And this is really for us to provide this technical assistance for you all, for workplaces, to understand better how to implement workplace charging, why you should, and whether or not it's feasible, and what your kind of needs are as a workplace. And it's also a very equity-focused project for us. So a lot of our focus is on people who come from multi-unit dwellings or low-income housing, who may not otherwise have access to that home charging, that large chunk, where the workplace is going to make up more of their need in terms of charging their electric vehicles. So it's a very big focus for us. And again, this is important work kind of for that chart reason, right? Workplaces missed by the kind of large company initiatives are the ones who are going to be the slowest to adopt workplace charging for cost reasons or availability reasons or any other reasons. So they're a market that we really want to make sure has all the information that they need so that they can make these decisions well. And then again, that bottom chunk is a huge portion of the need comes from minority, low income, and other disadvantaged populations who don't have access to home charging. This slide here is just showing that this is not a solo gig. This isn't just the couple of Clean Cities coalitions you hear on the line today. This is a massive partnership with many partners across the country who've been doing this for a long time, who have a lot of expertise, and we can leverage all those resources really well to bring information directly to you, the workplace or employer, and try to get the best information, most relevant information, and real world information as possible. And then I'm going to show that kind of national coverage. The details here aren't super important, just to show that this is a very wide-reaching project, and so we can leverage wide-reaching information to make this more accessible to you. And then a couple of resources. Again, we're not going to go through all this today, but I do want this in a slide so that you can see it later on. There are some great resources online and then through us that can help you leverage all the great information that's out there and make workplace charging work for you and your employees. And then lastly, the kind of next steps here to connect with your workplace charging coach, that is us Clean Cities folks on the line. And then going to go through these bullets of questions that we'd happily guide you through to develop your plan and figure out whether this works for you and how to get it done. And I think with that, I'm going to pass it off to Michelle to tell you a little bit about the state of things in Tulsa, and then we'll hear from David for Central Oklahoma. Michelle, go ahead.
Thanks, Tyler. Hey, everybody. My name is Michelle Merchant, and I am the program director of the Tulsa Area Clean Cities Coalition, which is housed at the Indian Nations Council of Governments. We are so grateful that you're all on the line today, and we're thrilled to share some information with you about workplace charging and the Empower Project. We have an awesome program lined up for you today, and I, for one, am especially excited for you to hear from Austin Embry about a workplace charging project that he completed earlier this year for AAON right here in Tulsa. And before we get to that, I wanted to share just a few notes about Empower that are specific to my neck of the woods here in Tulsa. So on level 2 charging accessibility, similar to what Tyler just noted, we're really looking to expand access to level 2 charging with this Empower project. Primarily for the folks who don't have access to charging at home, which does constitute about 80% of all charging that takes place for EVs. So Oklahoma happens to be the only state in the country with more fast chargers available than level 2 chargers. And that means that those who lack access to charging at home, like your renters or apartment dwellers, they're often unable to access the fuel savings that EVs can offer. And so workplace charging presents a huge opportunity to make EVs accessible and cost-effective for more residents in our area, especially. And now you'll see on the screen that there are a few incentives that businesses should consider when in taking advantage of for a workplace charging project in Oklahoma. So first, we have a state tax credit that can cover up to 45% of the cost of overall project costs for EV chargers. The chargers do have to be public to access that state tax credit, so that's something to keep in mind for a workplace project. It may or may not be attractive for a workplace to make it available to the public. There's also a federal tax credit that would be available to anyone on the line, of course, according to your tax status, where you can access up to 30% of costs covered through that credit. Lastly, in the Tulsa area, Public Service Company of Oklahoma offers an EV rate tariff The cost is less than 4 cents a kilowatt if you're taking advantage of this tariff. So it is very attractive for commercial entities to take advantage of, especially for fleet charging if your company has any electric fleet vehicles, but could be utilized as well for a dedicated workplace charging program as well. So those are just a few incentives. Incentives do change pretty often. There have been a lot of changes in the last several years. And we do see more funding kind of down the pipeline in the next couple of years that may be specific to certain types of entities or certain types of projects. So please do reach out to me at Tulsa Clean City so that we can make sure that you are aware of all of the funding opportunities that are going to be accessible to your business. And there's my contact info on the screen. I really look forward to connecting with anybody on the line and helping your business explore EV charging for your employees. And I will pass it off to David Frick with Central Oklahoma Clean Cities.
David, are you able to speak? It looks like you're on as an attendee, and I see two of you on there.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, and I would pull up my camera, but I don't have that option. That's okay. I'll get into it. So my name is David Frick, and I'm a co-coordinator at Central. Okay, now I'm back. All right. Sorry about that. A little technical difficulty. Okay, so I'm David Frick. I am a co-coordinator at the Central Oklahoma Clean Cities, and our approach to this project, to be honest, we kind of had to figure out our way of how this project could be beneficial to our community. I think every city and location is a little different on where they are with electric vehicles and EV charging. And what we discovered with talking with workplaces and business owners that they aren't quite there yet. They understand EVs, but they feel like it's not quite, in our region. But people who were receptive were building owners. They see it as an asset to their building, a way to provide some unique value. And so that's where we've been getting the most traction. Our goal is, how I sort of pitch myself for this Empower project is that we are, a free EV charging consultant. We will work through a lot of the issues of, do you want a level 2 or a level 3? In most cases, you want a level 2 for workplace charging. Do you have enough power to supply the chargers? Working through those things and providing this information for free. We also tie in other initiatives to empower. A lot of my conversations, veer into solar projects and battery storage and things like that. And so we're happy to talk about it. We do focus on EV charging. I mean, that is the goal, is to install workplace charging, but it's always good to have those extra value initiatives thrown in there. And then Michelle covered the federal and state incentives for Oklahoma, but there are no local incentives for Oklahoma City. And so, that's what we're working with. And despite that, we still, get some good feedback and response and definitely some interest in installing charging. And so now I think we should hear from a real world example. And I believe that Austin is next up.
Well, excuse me, guys. I'm Austin Embry. I apologize now. I've got a lingering cough here, so if I cough every once in a while, I apologize up front. So first off, I'm Austin Embry with AAON. We design and manufacture heating and air conditioning systems. We're located here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We employ about 2,000 people. We've got about 1.8 million square feet of manufacturing space. So we're a pretty large company over here. And through the last couple of years, we've really been working on our sustainability initiatives. We've been working with ESG reports, and we kind of walk through the different things we can do to kind of help our portfolio, help the environment, and kind of use it as to attract different people, because we found that a lot of the working pool, being a sustainable company, having a green vision is very important for who they decide to work for. So we've kind of looked at this from a broad spectrum. We've installed large solar installation grids, done geothermal, and part of this we looked at is what about EV charging? How can that help us? How can that help us with our ESG reports or sustainability, and also with employee engagement? So we did a survey of different people at AAON and of how interested would you be upfront about EV charging. And it was kind of a mixed bag. We had certain demographics that were very, very interested in it. And some people seemed to think that was something that will never happen, or it was 30 years away. But we gauged there was enough interest there to stick our toes in the water. And hopefully this could be a catalyst to educating people on EV charging. And through this process, we found that a lot of people, once they kind of get some more information, are very open, very receptive to it. It's just that they haven't been introduced to this information. So we started looking at, where's the best place to put it? What's the best process to do? And we settled on 2 EV chargers. We have them right along Yukon Avenue. While formerly it's only for company use, we actually have a policy that if a public person who does have physical access to this charges, we allow it. We just don't advertise it. So we decided ultimately, excuse me again, on phase 2 chargers. Level 2 chargers. So they are 48 volt, 48 amp, 240 volt chargers. Excuse me 1 second. Chargers that we set up. We do not charge anything to use them. They're completely free to use. We did this process about 24 months ago, and at the time, systems that could use credit cards to charge were quite expensive. The cost to do that incrementally over what we went with was about $7,000 per charger. And we did a cost analysis on what we pay electricity for, and if someone used it 8 hours a day, 360 days a year, how long would it take to pay that back? And it was on the order of 5 to 10 years it would take to make our money back. So we said, well, let's eat that cost. Let's pass it on to our employees, have that as another perk they get for working for us. And it simplifies the process quite a bit. So that's ultimately what we decided to do. So we set a plan for it. We installed it. And we have been monitoring the usage since we installed it about a year ago. And to begin with, we'd have about 1 car there parked once a week charging. And I drive an EV. So I use it once or twice a week to use it, and to gain attention. And the amount of people who've approached me on this with an EV, and they ask, how does that car work? Are the batteries going to have to be changed out in 9 months, and all these questions. And through the conversation, I think we've quadrupled or more in the past year how many EVs are driven to our work, and just the overall attitude towards them. And so we think it's been very tremendous, and we're working currently on plans to expand this. So once we get about a 50 to 75% utilization rate, which I think we're going to hit next year, we're going to work on expanding probably 4 to 8 more chargers. We're still deciding whether or not to make those free or charge basically the cost of electricity for that. So that's kind of things we're looking for at doing. The cost of this was quite inexpensive. We already had a lot of the panels and hardware set up for it to expand readily. It cost us about $3,000 in electrical and conduits to set this up. But overall, it's been great for us. We've really, I think, had an impact on the view of EVs. The process is not that difficult. We set up on the J1772 charger. At the time, there was not a charger standard, and that was probably the most readily available for the most people. Going forward, we'll probably use the North American charging standard, as that seems to be where everyone's going to. But yeah, that's kind of the overall thing we did. We were very proud of it. I think it's a great thing. I think more people should do it, both from an environmental standpoint and a recruiting standpoint. And I'll kind of leave it at that. If anyone has any questions, we'll be having a question and answering session at the end. I'd be happy to answer. So with that, I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Tyler, is that me? Is that my cue?
I think we're going to go to Richie Biedenharn at Cleco
Sounds
next.
good.
And got a couple slides to go through for Austin just while we're teeing that up of their site. And Richie, if you're ready to go, we can go ahead and start presenting.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Tyler. So, hi, everyone. My name is Richie Biedenharn. I'm the Electric Vehicle Program Manager at Cleco. Next slide, Tyler, please. I'm going to give you all an overview of workplace charging and then our support of it. And then I also have a slide that's, gives advice of where to get started if Cleco isn't your utility. So just general utility advice. So next slide, please, Tyler. So Cleco Power is a investor-owned utility in Louisiana. We have around 300,000 meters and about 3 gigawatts of capacity and generation. We're vertically integrated, so we have generation, wires, everything else. So we're pretty, geographically spread out in Louisiana. We have a pretty unique customer base that's heavy residential, but also some population centers in central Louisiana. So why go electric with workplace charging? If you exclude the hours at a home, this graph below shows all the different stops that an EV might make. So it shows like travel stops, shopping centers, leisure destinations, and you see the largest portion is the workplace. So 6.5 to 8+ hours in one location is a great opportunity to charge a vehicle in a way that is cost effective and healthy for the grid, right? So we looked at earlier sort of the duck back curve. Midday charging lines up well with renewable generation. It's also can be very slow and still get a meaningful charge. Anytime you use like a fast charger, that's very expensive power for a utility to provide and expensive power to purchase as an EV user. So workplaces are really great places to use chargers. So what's the value prop? We've discussed and heard from Austin, like the incentivizing employees. It complements a company's sustainability efforts, and it also signals corporate leadership. So as far as incentivizing employees, you can attract the top talent. People are interested in, in decarbonization and clean energy, which many companies are looking for those types of hires with a lot of their internal initiatives. It's a very low cost thing to provide, and it provides an outsized impact to drivers. You're not just giving them power, but you're giving them convenience, and that's priceless. And it also supports employee return to office. So how does it complement sustainability efforts? You can work towards achieving internal sustainability goals, for your company and for your region. It's a way to be recognized in your community, and it complements company-owned fleet electrification. I know at Cleco we're having early workplace charging discussions, and we've had some conceptual ideas around supporting our EV fleet and workplace charging kind of at the same time as a way to save costs. And then as far as signaling corporate leadership, you set yourself apart as a responsible entity. You're sort of a early adopter on a new technology. I think that in 20 years, all this will be very, very, very boring, which is exciting to me. I want this to become a standard. But you'll be one of the earliest movers in your region if you adopt this. And there's some value to that as a company and sending a message to your community. Next slide, Tyler. So how does Cleco encourage workplace charging? We have $1,000 cash incentive per plug to install these workplace chargers. And if you take the approach of putting in non-network chargers, that can cover quite a lot of the cost. We also have a relatively easy application process, and we have experts on hand to help with these installations. So workplace charging isn't our only incentive. We have a whole table or range over here. So multifamily, fleet, publicly accessible charging for like shopping centers and all that. We see all that as part of our overall EV strategy, and workplace being a really major component of it. What consumers want to see to drive EVs are more chargers, and every single one of these is like a beacon letting them know that EVs have arrived. You can drive the EV conveniently and safely. I drive the EV, and I will always prefer to visit locations with chargers and things like that. And it just definitely sends the right message to EV drivers. And then finally, how do you engage with the utility on workplace charging? And this is just kind of general advice because I know many people on the call are probably not Cleco customers. If your utility has an incentive program, that's a great place to start. You can begin engaging with that team. They'll have contacts in the industry to set you up with and have general advice to use. I'd say this on any sort of EV type charging project, and it expands past workplace charging. Get your utility involved as early as you can. If you're a managed account, talk to your commercial account manager at your utility. You need to make sure that the incremental load from this, if it's not behind the meter, which many of these sites can be behind the meter where maybe the utility isn't quite as involved, especially if you're putting in a dedicated service for this, you need to start engaging with them early. There's a lot of back orders and equipment. I've seen, really basically commodity parts that I never even knew the name of have, 6-month plus backlogs. So it's really important to start that process early, and so you don't get surprised by, say, a long lead time item. Behind the meter projects, which are projects where you just put them on your side of the meter. It's like if you have a facility and you have space on your panel, you can put in EV chargers. You still may want to talk to your utility if you're putting in several of these. You want to make sure that your infrastructure that the utility supports you with can support that incremental load. So at Cleco, we'd always be very, very happy to hear from a customer that wants to check something like this. Heading off a potential problem is always a good thing. And then another major item, separate from utility, is experienced contractors are really important to work with, and they can often help coordinate that engagement with the utility. So they work with utilities quite a lot on projects. If you're not a managed account, this is probably a great place to start with, getting the utility involved. And I keep hammering it, but contact that utility early in the process. We don't want to be a reason why a project takes longer than it should. So with that, that's all the content I have. I look forward to the Q&A section.
Awesome. Thank you, Richie. And I'm going to stop there, and Jeff is going to take it over for his slides, and we'll hear from an installer.
Great. And can y'all hear me okay?
Sound good to me?
Oh, I just see a typo in there. Don't look at that. All right. Hi, everybody. Yeah, Jeff Canton, Solar Alternatives. We've been in the EV infrastructure space for about, going on maybe 8 or 9 years, maybe longer. But we've been in business for about 15. The core of our work is energy storage and solar energy and microgrids, and EV infrastructure has been a big part of that for the last few years. A couple thousand projects between Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, and we'll be in our licenses will be in most of the Southeast by Q1 next year. So excited to discuss any of our services with anybody. I think about everybody on the call has a general idea about where we're talking about charging, the kind of in the middle range of the options there, and in the earlier side, where we're expecting folks to be in place for a few hours at a time. We're not generally expecting workplace charging, although we have a meeting, I believe later today with the organization that's going to use fast chargers for workplace charging. But typically you're talking vehicles that are going to be there for a few hours, right? So the units on the right, the standard level 2 plugs, J1772s. That's what most of your vehicles in the public are going to be able to take, for dwell times that most workplace experience. So unless you're dealing with a sales team or field team that's in and out really quickly that needs a faster charge, somebody who is only in the building for a short amount of time, you're typically looking at those ports. One of the technologies I think a lot of folks are familiar with, ChargePoint, in one of the projects that we're working with Louisiana Clean Fuels on, actually uses Blink chargers in a charge-to-charge format. But we talk a lot about workplace charging from what amenities can we provide, but increasingly the site hosts are wanting to recover some of those costs in the chargers, the electricity, the infrastructure itself. And you do have the option to get equipment that's going to let you charge to charge. And so you've got anywhere from the ChargePoint units, which have a higher upfront cost, but a lot more functionality, the ability to show ads, built-in cordage management, to a more cost-effective option. Even the Tesla chargers have a charging function where you can charge to charge with them use the Tesla app. So that feature, is something where not every charger has that. So it's important, along with some of the other aspects that we have to consider when we're doing design on a workplace charging. In addition to charge, cord management, even though it sounds like a small issue or a small item, it ends up being a pretty big arrangement because your cords are a source of maintenance. They're, it can be a presentation issue, and ultimately it's a risk issue, slip and fall. So managing those cords is a part of sort of the consideration in your technology that you choose. And along with charge to charge, essentially network units have the ability to do access control. So you may have the same parking area for the public as you do for your workers, in which case you may want to have different policies depending on who's charging. And a small item that kind of gets into design details is when you're putting in chargers, if you're behind the meter or if you're trying to control your build out costs, being able to share power between the chargers, called circuit sharing, can help reduce the build cost quite a bit. Just make sure that's a consideration if you're talking to a designer or a provider for that. That can help you either use existing infrastructure or have a lower cost for new infrastructure. We have a lot of reasons in general for adding EV infrastructure. I think it's been discussed by a few folks, but retaining talent and having an attraction for your workers, your employees and potential employees is a big sign. And it also is a big indicator, for a prospect, whether it's an employee or a customer looking at your site. Another consideration that we didn't put on there, ADA, you do have some considerations if you have employees that are ADA, or if you're just trying to make sure your installation does have at least one space that's ADA compliant. There's some rules around that. And we won't go too much into the details, but they essentially make sure you have some spacing, the cord placement, the accessibility of the cord from the other side of the curb, the vehicle side of the curb, and then a ramp nearby if it's going to be off of not in a garage environment. A quick one: we did several projects for a Louisiana utility in New Orleans area, and even though they were really public aimed, the rollout planning and the technology really applies to any sort of multi-location, multi-unit system with network charging and access controls. And so this program involved essentially design build. The client came, said, we have a project, we want to be able to do this many chargers at these locations. We want this type of controls on it. We have these units identified we'd like to use. We went through with the client and looked at every location, and just like with a workplace, you're going to have very site-specific requirements from access, transformers. The utility has a role in their part of it to bring power to a certain spot if it's a new service. You've got special permitting requirements in many places, depending on where the location is. And you have to plan your circuit, your power needs based on the number of circuits you want to run for that charging installation, but also what you want to run in the future. So if you're going to plan out these locations, really think about if you've got a garage, say where you have 100 folks in there and you want to put 2 chargers in, do you want to go ahead and build out the capacity for another 5 or 10 chargers in the future when you've got those additional needs? So other permitting considerations, you may have historic requirements depending on your area. The fire department may need to review. New Orleans even had to have the parks and parkways because it was on a street side. Take a look at that. So there's a lot of considerations once you're outside of a closed garage or a completely private area that need to be considered there. So I think that's all I had for my talk. I think there was some opportunity for questions as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any the Q&A box immediately, but if anybody does have any questions, please drop them to the Q&A. And Jeff, if you want to drop your share, I'm just going to kind of panel mode and take some Q&A for a little bit before we close it off. I have an immediate question that comes to mind, particularly for you, Austin. You mentioned that you're seeing that the usage of your chargers is increasing in time, and you think that next year you might get to a 50-60% utilization rate. Where did you come up with that number as your target for expansion, and how are you thinking about that expansion in the future?
Yeah, great question. So it's part analytics, part intuition. So I've kind of witnessed the growth we've had over time, and if we extrapolate the growth, that's where I think we'll be if it maintains somewhat. And it seems to be increasing growth at a faster and faster rate as more people become educated on EVs and more people who use it talk to other people about it. It seems to be exponentially growing. I'd say, I mean, during the workday, we're probably close to 50% utilization right now. So I think next year it's pretty comfortably we'll be at some point beyond that 50 to 75% utilization, I suspect. Hopefully beyond that. And then part of our plans is to across our campus in different areas. We're pretty big, so we're going to kind of segment these EV chargers to ideal locations. So kind of preferred parking is part of it too. If you have an EV, we put the EV chargers close to the doors, and depending on where you work, you'll have access to the closest area you can get. We had Texaco did a great job doing the solar installation for our building, and they offer EV chargers. So we're going to work with them on phasing this out. As we go to beyond 2 chargers, we'll probably go to some kind of payment system on that to where we can at least kind of cover the electrical charges, possibly semi-subsidizing it. But PSO does such a great job here in Tulsa with low electricity rates. It's a no-brainer for people to charge. So don't know if that answers all your questions or if you have anything more.
Yeah, Austin, I have one that kind of lines up with Tyler's question. Since you just completed this first installation, I'm curious if you guys did any laying of additional conduit or any other future proofing, knowing that you wanted to add in some chargers later down the line.
That's a great question too. So in the area that we ran, we only had the physical space where the 2 chargers are for those 2. But what we did is we set the panels up and the wire gauge up, increase it so that if we ever wanted to go to a higher amperage system, we could. So those systems are 48 amp. We ran 60 amp circuits to that, but the wire can have a handle over 100 amps to each of those. So if we ever wanted to upgrade it, we have that. But also as we've built additional buildings into it, when we were doing all the concrete pours for our parking lot, we ran conduits underground and had them subbed up for future use so that if we ever wanted to add EV chargers, we already have the conduits, know the locations, and the wire pulls will be pretty easy. So we've got 2 more expansion areas where we can expand, I think at least 6 EV chargers in each location. That would be a 60 amp circuit for that. And then we're kind of in an ideal setup so that the rest of our facility where we want to set these up is next to a substation room. So we'll just come out of those directly from the building and be set up for that.
Awesome. And one last question for you, Austin. I was curious how you went about choosing your charger. And I know you mentioned that you will be making some changes to the connector that you're going to be going after with your future installations. If you wouldn't mind kind of just expanding on that a little.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did a lot of research up front. So we talked with Francis Solar, we talked with some other companies that could come in, set up these charge stations. And I think they're very good systems. I think the quality would have been great, but again, they were kind of cost prohibitive back when we were looking into this. So when we did that cost analysis of having someone like that do a turnkey, the cost was quite high, and we made the decision, let's go with a out of the box system that does not have any kind of credit card or transactional fees to that. So at that point, I simply did some Google searches, talked to some people who installed them, did your typical buyer's investigation onto that. And we decided on JuiceBox. It had a really good rating, was reasonably priced. I think it was about $400 to buy each one of these. They have has Wi-Fi set up so we can actually track the usage of it just to see interest. And that's some of the analytics we're getting on how much usage we're getting and where we think it's going to grow to. We're very happy with it. I mean, it does everything you want it to do. the J1, was it J1227 standard? At the time, that was probably the most common non-Tesla system. Fortunately, every Tesla that I'm aware of that comes with the fast charger comes with the adapter, so it's very easy to plug in. People who don't have that J1772 adapter, you can buy them for $20, as opposed to the CHAdeMO system, which not a lot of people use, and the adapters are quite expensive. So that's why we chose to do J1772. That being said, the North American Charging Standard, which is what Tesla uses and what Tesla is allowed to use for other companies to use, is kind of looking like it's the standard for the future for all companies. I believe Ford, Chevy, I think Volkswagen was the only holdout, and I think they're pretty much going to be coming on board here pretty soon. So I anticipate in the next year, I think 99% of every EV vehicle will use the North American Charging Standard. It'll take a couple of years to transition over to that. But I think if you're planning an EV charger for the future, that makes the most sense now, is to go with the Tesla North American Charging Standard. And that's what we plan on doing.
I have a question for, I think, for Richie and Jeff, to kind of follow up with what Austin was saying a minute ago about the kind of preparing for expansion. I think that that's something that we hear a lot with installations, is like whether or not you should consider laying down the groundwork for future expansion to kind of save that cost in the future. But Jeff, and then maybe Richie, could y'all speak a little bit to what the cost of that might be, what the savings might be down the line, and then how you think about that sort of future proofing in terms of the installation?
To kind of plan for expansion?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we're talking level twos, I guess my experience is, you know, you have these sort of incremental levels when you're putting in, especially if you're talking putting in new services, which is a little easier to talk about. You know, your electrical equipment comes in these increments of 200 amps, 400 amps, single phase, three phase. And a lot of it is, if you're going to go ahead and put in a new service, it's almost like just go ahead and max out your potential for that particular electrical size a lot of times. So, you know, if you're working around a certain number of spaces, you could plan out, you know, we're going to set these 10 spaces aside. Let's put in a 200 amp service. Let's put in a location for 5 dual chargers, you know, at 40 amps. And we'll plan to circuit share those. You can kind of think of it, how many spaces, how many circuits, what charge rate do I want to provide? And you might only need to put in 2 chargers, and you put in the rest of the conduit. That extra effort after you put in those first, say, 2 chargers for the next 3, it might be a few $100s compared to the several thousand, you know, that it would probably take to tear up the concrete and do all that work all over again later. You know, so you are talking pretty significant savings. The only reason I wouldn't plan for the future at this point is if you were just physically limited in space for how many parking spots could go next to that new service, or if you're working on an existing service that already had limitations, you're pretty much maxing that out. In that case, you're really just working on the bounds. But at this, as it's been pointed out by others, this is going to continue to grow. So unless you're bound, you know, and I guess the other bound could be budget, you know, if you just can't afford another penny on that project. Otherwise, it makes a lot of financial sense to do it up front.
From the utilities perspective, I think, you know, Jeff said it just right. You know, maxing out your service does make sense. Cleco, you're at Cleco, we can work on making sure that, you know, we scope our conduit and stuff like that on our side of the meter to support like a future upgrade. Different utilities are going to have different policies around that. But, you know, we find it to be a very, very effective way to make, you know, our, you know, capital be cost effective. So we've done this before on some charging sites where we'll actually scope out larger conduit than is strictly necessary, and then it becomes almost trivially easy for us to make an upgrade. So that's definitely something you can work with your utility on. You know, I think that, you know, as far as building 2, planning for 10, I think that's the right move. I think one area where I would say that, like, from the utility perspective, our policy or our point of view on workplace charging is, you know, 6 kilowatts, 8 kilowatts, whatever is probably entirely adequate. I wouldn't really plan for faster workplace charging, if that makes sense. I would always push towards more spots because you get more bang for your buck. And if you remember, it's 6 to 8 hours at work. That's plenty of time to charge at 6 kilowatt hours, right? So charging at these, you know, new 19.2 kilowatt chargers, it's really kind of a waste of resources. So that, you know, as far as expansion goes, always think about expanding spots, not necessarily charging faster.
Yeah, I think maybe some context for anybody who's listening who's not as familiar with the kind of kilowatts and kilowatt hours speak. If you have a charger that's in the 7 kilowatt ballpark, which is like a reasonable kind of standard level 2 speed, and you're charging for your full 6 hours at work or 8 hours at work, you're looking at well over half the range for even up to like a Model S, like a Tesla Model S. So that's half of your battery in terms of charge. So if you're assuming that you can make the round trip every day to and from work with your full battery, that half battery is kind of a max of what you might need. So I think that's definitely a reasonable kind of sweet spot for that.
And just to build on that too, Tyler, the average daily driving requirement is typically a lot less than half of your battery capacity. So the actual charging time can still be quite a lot shorter than that. So it's definitely a optimization game as far as, charging as slow as possible. We always recommend that to customers, is charge as slow as reasonably makes sense, because you will save money on commercial tariffs. Fast charging still, fits into that because you need to charge quickly. So it's okay to charge fast in that situation if you're on a road trip or whatever. But at work or at home, take your time with it. It's a better use of resources.
Something you said there actually makes me build immediately onto a question that I think I'd like to hear from Austin and maybe Richie and maybe even Jeff about. And then we have a question in the Q&A box. But if we are not charging you're not needing the entire day to charge on even a slow level 2 charger, which might be like 4 kilowatts, is probably the slowest you'll see. If you're not actually going to need that for your entire 6 to 8 hours, how are y'all thinking about congestion at the charger for people just being parked there? And once they finish charging, especially if you're looking at non-networked chargers that aren't able to send a text message or whatever to the user whenever their battery is full. Are y'all working on any ways, or do y'all have any implementation strategies for telling people like, hey, whenever your battery is full, like move your car to another spot? Like how do you actually manage that side of things, or has that not been an issue yet?
It's a great question. So I'll try to answer where ours are. So that's a problem we have not yet solved. We have several different ideas. Currently, it's small enough, and there's a low enough amount of people that basically the understanding is when your vehicle is charged, we ask you that on your next available break, that you open it up and you let someone else use it. So if you're driving a Tesla, most vehicles, when they reach a certain charging point, will notify the driver, or they have the ability to check on it and see where it's at. So that's kind of how we're doing it right now. We don't have an easy way to just tell. We're not policing it. Very difficult. But as we expand, as it gets difficult, we've got to look at that. And so that's something I don't have the answer for, but we do know it could be potentially a problem. But our general rule is that use a charger until it stops charging your car. Then we ask you to move it over to it. So it's a good problem, but I don't have all the answers for everyone yet. And I'd be interested to see what other people come up with, because I'd be interested to learn.
Yeah, I can speculate and, don't have direct experience with it, but, relying on, charging etiquette and the public works the majority of the time, but then there are some people who will just take over a charger forever, essentially. So like, idle fees are a big thing that, many charging sites need. Even free charging sites are looking to adopt idle fees because of this issue. But in the workplace, depending maybe on the size of the employer, it's a little bit less of an anonymous environment. I think that, people maybe be a little more, hopefully, courteous towards their fellow employees. So, it could be that informal policies like that are really all you need. But if it becomes a problem, you could look at implementing idle fees if you have, that network capability, or, some sort of, stricter policy internal. I don't know.
Yeah, great points.
I would just add to that real quick. The network chargers do have a little bit of a premium to them, but when you have units like Tesla's wall connector, even, you talk about the switch to NACS next year, and they have a charger that they call the universal that can do J charger and NACS charging. And, it's less than $1,000 for the charger, and it can do circuit sharing. Essentially, our solution and our recommendation tends to be just overbuild the chargers, and put them on circuit sharing. And even if you have to put a lower charge rate, if you're limited to a 200 amp service, don't put in the 60 amp, version of it, or don't set it to 60 amps, set it to 40 amps, and put in 10 of them, on a 200 amp service, and let that be, single phase, and let that be how you provide 10 spaces for charging. And all of those cars are going to get a charge. I don't know that, especially in a workplace context, the sort of promise to the user is we're going to fill your car up by the end of the day.
Right.
It's really like we're going to provide an amenity and give you some value. And it kind of like limits how much the site host, the employer is going to make themselves responsible for. Like you say, you could put in a 19 kilowatt charger and pump the kilowatt hours out and build out a 800 amp service and be a big fueling station, or you can look at it more like an amenity at a little bit lower pace. So I think there's ways to overbuild the chargers. I mean, I've even heard in something like think of the context of an airport, where, do you really need like a high powered level 2 charger there, or do you just put in a level 1 charger, like essentially a really low power one, because you're going to be there so long. And that way you can put in many times more chargers, because a lot of your build out cost is not in the charger itself. It's in the electrical cost of the work. So my recommendation is keep putting chargers in until you have people, a few that people are not using, and just try to stay a step ahead of them.
I've definitely, as an EV driver myself, thought that many times about how I would rather just have a plug, like just a regular old wall outlet that I can use without making the parking garage owner mad at me, and just plug in there, because honestly, that's more than enough for my daily driving. It's way more than enough, and it's dirt cheap to install comparatively, right? Now I'll say that in working one of the state garages where I park for our office, and we have 2 charge point chargers there. And actually the EV owners have kind of set up a group chat through like text message about whenever somebody like needs a charge badly because they drove more than they intended to, or there's somebody's parked there and maybe full and they're not getting the usage. People will just text each other, and it's kind of an informal system. Which is not necessarily ideal, but I think that there's enough need for that sort of thing that if we're forming these kind of informal groups via text, that probably shows that we as an industry sort of need to solve that problem at some point with some better solution.
I do think the idle fees are a big part of it. That's becoming more of a standard, and again, kind of nudges you toward the network solution, even if it's rudimentary.
Yeah. We do have one question in the Q&A box from Texaco Solar. This is directed at Austin, but I think maybe Richie would have some comments as well, and maybe even Jeff. But the question is, how much did ESG reporting play into your decision-making with workplace charging? How these initiatives you've taken improve your sustainability journey? And will you be expanding your fleet service to electric vehicles? Just how are you thinking about ESG, about sustainability, and how does that play into your choice to offer workplace charging? And then are you pairing that with fleet charging in the future? It does look like Austin is risen, so Richie, you have a chance to get in there quick if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, as far as Cleco specifically for our fleet, I think that, I'd say it's like a qualitative approach to our ESG targets. It's not necessarily being baked in quite yet. We're still very early in our fleet journey. We're early on workplace charging. So we're still kind of experimenting, if that makes sense. And then additionally, we see our incentive programs and all that as part of that wider ESG strategy to helping our customers decarbonize and use, electricity, which is a less carbon intensive way to use for transportation. So it does fit in our strategy. I think that I wouldn't say it directly goes into like our carbon accounting just yet, but I expect it will in the coming years.
Awesome, and it looks like you're back, Austin. If you'd like to take that question, take a swing at it.
Can you guys hear me fine?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Could you repeat the question? I apologize. My computer died, so I'm joining you from my cell phone right now.
Not a problem. So this is from Texaco Solar. The question is, how much did ESG reporting play into your decision-making with workplace charging? How will these initiatives you've taken improve your sustainability journey? Will you be expanding your fleet service to electric vehicles?
That's a great question. So ESG has definitely helped propelled our motivation, not just for EV chargers, but all sustainability actions. It's really gotten engagement from upper management all the way down to the bottom on what we should do. And a lot of these things that you do, you kind of do it to tick some of the boxes, but the more you explore, the more they actually just make sense from a business standpoint. And so I think it's really good at to get your attention collectively on the issues, get to brainstorming, kind of just to get everything moving. And then once we did that, we found, no, there's all kinds of opportunities out there. So I think it's been really, really big for us to think that way, to get moving that way. And what was the part two of the question? I apologize.
Part of it was also whether or not you were considering switching your fleet to electric vehicles, and if that plays into it.
We've talked about it. We don't yet have any definitive plans to it. At some point, we definitely will. We are currently looking at buying an EV shuttle. So we have parking, and we have several different buildings now on our campus. And so we're looking at potentially the first quarter next year owning an EV shuttle that'll go around, deliver, and commute people from the different parking lots to different buildings. Our road techs currently use trucks, really large trucks, to go around the country to service different buildings, HVAC building service techs like that. And so currently there's not a lot of EV vehicles that are great for that. So I know Rivian's got some trucks, the Cybertruck's coming out. So we've kind of talked high level on maybe converting some of those to EVs. So it's something we're looking at, but there's not a clear, home run answer yet that we've seen. But if anyone else has any suggestions to that, again, we'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah, I'll just quickly build on that. We've been experimenting with a Ford Lightning as a fleet vehicle. And it's been a pretty successful vehicle for us. It's in use in our safety department. That said, its optimal use case is sort of like a return to base operation out in one like region of our territory. When that truck has to cross from one region to another, like I think our longest drive is around 230 miles. It starts to struggle a bit. It's highway driving, so it doesn't quite get that range, and it takes a long, deep charge to be able to make it to that second facility and then return back to that charger, right? So you have to charge enough to get back to the charger. The charging environment has improved a bit, so that's going to be a little bit easier going forward, and we're working on that. But for the application of like return to base, I expect us to have a lot of like light duty trucks and vehicles in the near future, which will help, with our carbon emissions.
It's great.
Tyler, I have another kind of question if we're ready to jump to a different topic. One thing that I always get questions about when I'm reaching out to folks about Empower is the costs involved with keeping the chargers maintained and potential maintenance costs down the line. So I'm just curious from you all, with your various experiences, could you shed some light onto the costs involved, both from, I guess, the cost of power from the utility as well as any ongoing maintenance costs?
So I guess I'll jump off. It'll vary greatly on a lot of factors. So your capacity, the voltage, how much capacity you want, do you want a meter or not? Is it Wi-Fi connected or not? And then your basic infrastructure. So I can speak for our case. We were fortunate that we have designed our facilities to have a lot of excess capacity and electricity as our assembly lines and different needs move around. So we had the panels and the basic infrastructure to scale this up basically as big as we want it to be. So that incremental cost we did not have to incur. That can be a lot of your cost. The next part of it is how do you get from these larger panels to your point of use, these level 2 chargers? And this is where one thing I think people should be thinking ahead in every construction project, because I think EV adoption is only going to increase more exponentially. And one of the biggest costs to setting up a charger, if you have to run into a parking lot, is going to be tearing up your concrete, setting in some conduits, and then repouring that concrete. So if you even think maybe, possibly, I'll be installing an EV charger someplace, I highly recommend you set some conduits underground. Conduits are basically free in the scheme of things. So we were fortunate enough that we were doing some nearby work for ours. We really didn't have to run too much extra conduit. So basically we had some breakers we installed and some heavy gauge wire. And so I think the wire cost us about $3,000 extra change for some breakers. So maybe $4,000 for the electrical component install. And then our chargers, I think our juice box chargers were between $400 and $500. So easy under $5,000 each for these phase 2. And I think our next ones will be even less expensive because the runs will be even shorter, and we've set in place the conduits and the infrastructure basically to do that. So I highly recommend, thinking ahead. And as others have pointed out, you don't necessarily have to do a 60 amp phase 2 circuit. It might make sense to do 120, 20 amp for people who have shorter commutes. So, and then as far as maintenance, we haven't had these long enough to really see. Right now, the cost is zero. We've operated these for a little over a year, I believe, and they've ran flawlessly. So
I'll speak a little bit, a lot of the customers that we work with on this are making a decision around giving the power away for free versus trying to recover the costs. That's a big decision, I think, for many of them. The new Tesla combo wall charger, a wall connector, does make that a little bit easier. But what we usually tell customers, if it's behind the meter, it's typically in Cleco's commercial rate schedule, probably 75 cents to $1 per hour that a car is charging at 6 kilowatts per hour. So, you don't probably expect all your cars to charge the entire workday. So like there'll be like a cutoff of how long you're being billed at 75 cents an hour. But it's pretty small cost typically, and it can easily be absorbed in, with the rest of your bill. It can get a little different if you have a dedicated service, and that's when it's important to talk to your utility. They can work with you on coming up with like an estimate of what that bill will be. But typically the electric costs are really outweighed by the fixed costs of putting in one of these projects.
Awesome. I think I only have kind of one more question in mind for the group broadly, and then maybe if anybody else has them, we'll go to closing thoughts after that. I'm really curious if y'all thought or how y'all thought about potentially surveying employees either before or after moving forward with a project. Have y'all done any surveying of your employees to gauge interest in advance of it? Have you talked to them afterwards? What sorts of questions are you asking, and how does that play into it, or is it very much a build it and they will come approach so far?
Well, I'll start. So we kind of did two things. So we use a service on Paycom where we can push out notifications and surveys to employees. We do that for a lot of different criteria, ways we can improve our facilities, one way we can improve employee morale. And I think in the end of 2022, we set out a thing on basically what is your opinion of EVs. It was in a questionnaire that had about 20 or 30 things that were not directly related to EVs, but we had about 2 or 3 questions that were there. Do you own an EV? What are your thoughts on EVs, like favorable, non-favorable, 1 to 10? And would you find value if AAON provided an EV charger? And so we got some results back on that, and very, very mixed. So we can break it into demographics and different things. And some people, like a lot of our engineering groups, were very favorable of EVs. A lot of our manufacturing line people didn't know much about it and were kind of scared of it. And so we kind of discovered, hey, we need to do some education with this. And so we've kind of made it a point to try to educate them on that. And we have a end of year questionnaire that'll be coming out this year. I think it's going to be in about a week or two. And we're going to put those questions on there as well and see where we stack up compared to last year. And we'll kind of monitor it there going forward. And you guys gave me a great idea too. With education, you guys mentioned, how useful it is for people to charge at home. And I don't think a lot of people who are not familiar with EVs already understand that's a concept and how easily that can be done. You don't have to have a level 3 charger there. So you guys have given me some advice there, and I'm going to make that a public announcement there on how to do that. Maybe have some resources so that people can adopt EVs and do some charging at home too.
And I'll just give a really quick plug. Anytime that any business needs some sort of education like that for their employees, I think that's a thing that I can't speak necessarily specifically for Michelle and David, but that's the thing that we're always happy to do at Clean Cities. Happy to show up and provide a workshop on what that looks like, either very high
Awesome.
level or even deeper. So I don't know for sure if Michelle or David are interested in that sort of thing, but we would love to do that in Louisiana if anybody is interested in workplace charging and wants that kind of education piece to provide those resources directly or just to you for you to disseminate.
Yep, Tyler, you're exactly right. We're here for you, Austin. We're happy to help any way we can. And we get requests like that all the time to like write up a fact sheet that's specific to some type of event or message that a group is trying to share with its members or employees. So very happy anytime to help with initiatives like that.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything, or maybe closing thoughts if we want to move that direction?
Nothing from me.
I think the last thought that I will leave folks with, well, first of all, I want to thank all the wonderful panelists for joining us today. I thought this was a really great conversation, and I'm excited that we've recorded this for future reference by folks. But I think the important part on getting in touch with the utility very early was something that I just want to highlight again here in the end. One thing I did not mention about our deployment of Empower here in Tulsa is that we are partnering with our local utility, PSO, to make sure that everybody who's partnering with us through Empower is going to have that early access with the right folks at the utility to make sure that we're taking into consideration all of the kind of technical needs or technical issues that may come up throughout the process. So that's just one point I'd like to leave us with.
Absolutely. I definitely want to echo the thank you to everybody who joined today and for everybody for listening in and all the panelists for speaking. I did want to end with this last slide. Hopefully y'all can see it all right and I share screen correctly. Just with some of the last resources, a link to the recording that will be posted in the coming weeks, and then our Clean Cities contact information as well. And if nobody has any other closing thoughts, thank you all so much, and we can leave it there.
Thanks,
Y'all have a
Tyler.
good day.
Thank y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy holidays.